November 14th, 1957, Apalachin, New York. Sergeant Edgar Croswell sat in his unmarked car watching a dirt road. He'd been watching it all morning. Something wasn't right. Cadillacs, brand new, license plates from California, Florida, Ohio, New Jersey, Illinois, dozens of them, all driving into the same property, a 53-acre estate owned by Joseph Barbara, a local beverage distributor who Croswell knew had mob connections. This wasn't normal. This was a sleepy town 200 miles northwest of New York City. Nothing happened here. Nobody important came here. But today, expensive cars kept arriving, men in expensive suits, dark sunglasses, that look. Croswell had been a cop long enough to recognize that look. He called for backup. 2 federal agents, his partner. They set up a roadblock at the end of the road leading to Barbara's property. Then they drove up to the house. What they found would change everything. Inside that house were approximately 100 men. Not just any men. The most powerful mob bosses in America. Leaders from New York, Chicago, Tampa, Detroit, Los Angeles, Cleveland, Philadelphia. Some had flown in from Cuba, others from Italy. They were there for a meeting, a convention, the commission gathering to discuss territory, settle disputes, and most importantly, to legitimize Vito Genovese's claim to power after he ordered the murder of Albert Anastasia 3 weeks earlier. The Mafia had been holding secret meetings for decades. This was supposed to be just another one. But when those mobsters saw uniformed state troopers walking up the driveway, everything fell apart. Men ran into the woods, expensive suits getting torn on branches, dress shoes sinking in the mud. Some tried to drive away, others hid in the basement. A few just stood there, stunned, not knowing what to do. By the end of the afternoon, 58 men were in custody. More escaped into the forest. And the Mafia's greatest asset, secrecy, was destroyed forever. Because up until that moment, the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, had publicly insisted the Mafia didn't exist. It was a myth. Local criminals, maybe, but not a national organization, not a syndicate. Apalachin proved them wrong, forced them to admit it, changed everything about how America fought organized crime. This is the story of one meeting, one disastrous afternoon, and how it ended a century of invisibility. The setup. To understand why Apalachin happened, you have to understand what came before it. October 25th, 1957, 3 weeks before the meeting. Albert Anastasia walked into the barbershop at the Park Sheraton Hotel in Manhattan. He sat in the chair, leaned back. The barber draped a hot towel over his face. 2 gunmen walked in. They shot Anastasia 5 times. He died instantly. Anastasia had been the boss of one of New York's 5 families. He was also one of the most feared men in the American Mafia. Former head of Murder Incorporated, the enforcement arm that had killed hundreds. His murder created a vacuum and a problem. Vito Genovese had ordered the hit. Genovese had been maneuvering for years to take control of what was then called the Luciano crime family. Frank Costello had been running it while Lucky Luciano was exiled in Italy. Genovese wanted it for himself. So, in May of 1957, Genovese ordered a hit on Costello. The gunman shot him in the head. Costello survived, but he got the message. He retired, handed control to Genovese. But Anastasia was still a problem. He was Costello's ally. He was powerful. He had his own family. Genovese needed him gone. So he partnered with Carlo Gambino, Anastasia's underboss, Together, they arranged the barbershop murder. Gambino would take over Anastasia's family. Genovese would solidify control of his own. Everyone would benefit. Except there was a problem. Both murders, Costello's attempted hit and Anastasia's actual murder, had created tension. Other bosses were nervous. Who's next? Was Genovese trying to take over everything? Could they trust them? The Mafia operated through a system called the Commission. Established in the 1930s after the violence of Prohibition, it was a council of bosses from the major families. They met to resolve disputes, discuss territory, maintain peace. Genovese needed the Commission's approval. He needed the other bosses to acknowledge his new position, to confirm that Gambino could take over Anastasia's family, to show that everything was legitimate and orderly. So he called for a meeting, a national gathering, all the major bosses, their advisors, their top lieutenants. He originally wanted to hold it in Chicago, but Stefano Magaddino, the Buffalo boss and the commission member, suggested a different location. His associate, Joseph Barbara, had a large estate in Apalachin, New York, rural, isolated, far from the city and law enforcement attention. Sam Giancana, the Chicago outfit boss, objected. It was a bad idea, too obvious, too risky. But Magaddino insisted. He chose Barbara and Russell Bufalino, another Pennsylvania mob figure, to handle the arrangements. The meeting was set for November 14th, 1957.
The location. Joseph Barbara owned a beverage distribution business, Canada Dry Products. He built an estate on McFall Road in Apalachin, 53 acres, large stone house, perfect for a large gathering. There was just one problem. They'd used the location before. The previous year, Carmine Galanti had been stopped by state troopers while driving away from a smaller meeting at Barbara's estate. They found he was driving without a license, extensive criminal history. That stop put Barbara's property on Sergeant Edgar Croswell's radar. Croswell wasn't just any cop. He was obsessed with organized crime. He'd been watching Barbara for years. He knew Barbara was connected. Barbara knew this. He'd even warned Magaddino that Croswell was suspicious, that using the location again was risky. Magaddino dismissed the concern. Too late to change it. On November 13th, Joseph Barbara went into town. He ordered expensive cuts of steak, large quantities. That same day, Barbara's son went to the Parkway Motel in nearby Vestal. He reserved 6 rooms, told the clerk it was for a convention of Canada Dry salesmen. Edgar Croswell happened to be at that motel, investigating a bad check case. He overheard the conversation. Canada Dry convention, multiple rooms. At the same time, expensive cars with out-of-state plates were showing up in town. Croswell didn't believe in coincidences. The arrival, November 14th, morning. The cars started arriving early. Cadillacs, Chryslers, Lincolns, brand new, expensive. Plates from California, Florida, Ohio, Colorado, Illinois, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. They drove through Appalachin, population less than 1,000, the kind of place where everyone noticed strangers. Croswell heard about it. He drove out to Barbara's estate with his partner, Vincent Vasisco. They parked where they could see the road leading to the property, counted plates. Croswell called for federal backup. 2 Treasury agents joined them. At 12:40 p.m., they drove up to the property. More than 30 expensive cars were parked outside. Through the windows, they could see dozens of men. The meeting had just started. The troopers were in uniform. They walked up the driveway and started writing down license plate numbers. Someone inside spotted them. Josephine Barbara saw the uniforms. She alerted the men. Panic. These were the most powerful criminals in America. Men who'd spent their entire lives avoiding law enforcement, who operated in the shadow, who never appeared in public together. And suddenly, there were cops.
They ran. Some headed for their cars. Croswell and Vasisco retreated to set up a roadblock at the end of McFall Road. When the mobsters tried to drive away, they were stopped, names taken, detained. Others ran into the woods, 53 acres of woods. They crashed through undergrowth in their expensive suits, dress shoes not made for running. Some were older men, overweight, not built for sprinting through the woods. State troopers chased them. Some mobsters hid behind trees. Others got stuck in mud. A few made it deep enough into the woods that they escaped. Many didn't. Some stayed in the house, figuring if they didn't run, they couldn't be accused of anything. They were just visiting Joe Barbara, who'd recently had a heart attack, just checking on a friend. That was the story they all told. Visiting Joe Barbara, social call, heard he wasn't feeling well. Dozens of men from across the country all independently decided to visit Joe Barbara on the same day, in the middle of nowhere, at the same time. Nobody believed it.
By the end of the afternoon, 58 men were detained. More escaped. Estimates suggest that around 100 men had been at the meeting total. The detained men included some of the most powerful mob figures in America. Vito Genovese, the man who called the meeting, the man trying to legitimize his new power. Carlo Gambino, about to take over the Anastasia family. Joe Profaci, boss of his own Brooklyn family. Joe Bonanno, one of the original commission members. Santo Trafficante from Tampa. James Lanza from San Francisco. Russell Buffalino from Pennsylvania. Sam Giancana from Chicago didn't attend, but many of his representatives were there. Leaders and representatives from families across the country, all in one place, all caught together. The police couldn't charge them with anything. They weren't wanted fugitives. They weren't breaking any law by gathering on private property. There was no evidence of a crime being committed at that moment. So they took names, documented who was there, noted their home addresses, their affiliations. Then they had to let most of them go. But the damage was done. Not legal damage, not yet. Public damage. The story hit newspapers immediately. Mob convention raided, 60 gangsters caught meeting. First proof of national crime syndicate. Suddenly, organized crime was front-page news. Americans who'd never thought about the Mafia were reading about it, seeing the names, the connections, the scope. And J. Edgar Hoover could no longer deny it existed. The FBI's denial. For decades, Hoover insisted the Mafia was a myth. Local criminals, yes, but a national organization? No such thing. This wasn't because he didn't know. Law enforcement had suspected for years. But Hoover didn't want to admit it. He was obsessed with communism. That's where he directed FBI resources, investigating suspected communists, building files on political activists. Organized crime didn't fit that priority. Fighting the Mafia was hard. It required long-term investigations, wiretaps, informants, resources. If Hoover admitted the Mafia existed on a national scale, he'd be expected to do something about it. So the result was bizarre. Hoover's FBI kept files on 25 million Americans, mostly suspected communists, but not Joe Bonanno, a powerful mob boss operating openly in New York. The FBI had 4 agents investigating organized crime in New York City. 4. Meanwhile, 400 agents were assigned to investigate subversives. Apalachin made this position impossible to maintain. 60 mob bosses caught together from families across the country with established relationships and clear coordination. This wasn't myth. This was a national criminal organization. 4 days after Apalachin, Hoover ordered the creation of an anti-mob initiative. Shortly after, he created the Top Hoodlum program. Every FBI field office had to prepare a list of 10 top criminals in their jurisdiction for investigation and prosecution. But Apalachin forced Hoover's hand. The invisibility was gone. The denial was over.
The legal consequences. The immediate problem was that catching the mobsters at Apalachin didn't give prosecutors much to work with. Being at a private gathering wasn't illegal. Unless prosecutors could prove what they were discussing, unless they could show conspiracy to commit specific crimes, they couldn't charge anyone with anything substantive. But prosecutors tried anyway. 20 of the detained men were charged with conspiracy and obstruction of justice. The charge was based on their refusal to explain why they were at Apalachin. They were convicted, all 20, but the convictions were overturned on appeal. The court ruled there was insufficient evidence that anyone was committing the crime simply by being there. The legal strategy failed. But legally, it didn't matter. The real damage wasn't in courtrooms. It was in public perception and law enforcement strategy. Joseph Barbara's life fell apart. He was charged with tax evasion. He lost his liquor license. His Canada Dry contract was terminated. In 1959, he suffered another heart attack. Less than a month later, he died. He was 54 years old. Vito Genovese's plan to legitimize his power completely backfired. Instead of gaining respect from the other bosses, he'd exposed them all. Many blamed him for the disaster. There was even an attempt on Magadino's life afterward. Someone threw a grenade through the window of his home in Buffalo. It failed to detonate, but the message was clear. Genovese didn't stay free long. In 1959, he was convicted on narcotics charges, sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. He died there in 1969. Carlo Gambino successfully took over the Anastasia family and ran it for nearly 20 years. But even for him, Apalachin was a disaster. The scrutiny made everything harder. The long-term impact. The commission never met like that again, never gathered in one place. Too risky. More significantly, the membership books closed. After Apalachin, the Mafia stopped making new members. For nearly 20 years, until 1976, they didn't induct anyone new. Too much heat. This had lasting consequences. Without new blood, families aged. By the time they reopened the books in the 1970s, they'd lost a generation. But the biggest impact was investigative. Before Apalachin, law enforcement treated organized crime as disconnected local problems. After Apalachin, they understood it as a national network. This led to coordinated investigations. Federal resources dedicated to understanding family structures, relationships, hierarchies. It led to new legal strategies. The RICO Act wasn't passed until 1970, but it was built on understanding developed after Apalachin. Understanding that the Mafia operated as an enterprise, that you could target the organization itself, not just individual crimes. It led to Robert Kennedy's crusade. When Kennedy became Attorney General in 1961, he made organized crime a priority. He called mobsters to testify before Senate committees, public hearings, exposing the scope of corruption. In 1963, Joe Valachi became the first made member to publicly testify about La Cosa Nostra. That testimony built directly on what was learned at Apalachin. By the 1980s and 1990s, law enforcement had dismantled much of the Mafia's power. One meeting, one afternoon, and the trajectory of organized crime in America changed forever.
The human element. What makes Apalachin remarkable isn't just what happened, it's how easily it could have been avoided. Magadino was warned not to use Barbara's estate again. Barbara himself was worried about Croswell's attention. Sam Giancana objected to the location entirely, but they went ahead anyway. Why? Arrogance. Decades of operating with impunity. They'd been invisible for so long, they forgot they needed to stay invisible. Edgar Croswell was just one state trooper. No special resources, no federal backing initially, just the cop who paid attention. If Barbara's son hadn't reserved those motel rooms, if Croswell hadn't been investigating that bad check case, if those expensive cars had been spread out over several days instead of all arriving at once, any of those things could have changed the outcome. Instead, men in expensive suits ran through the woods, got stuck in mud, tore their clothes on branches, were detained by local cops who couldn't quite believe what they'd stumbled into. The mystique shattered, the fear they'd cultivated for decades, gone in an afternoon.